So we just talked quite a bit about this. Lincoln had a lot to say about this particular example, and again, it's quite a miniature outboard. It's set the stage for lots of activities with small outboards in the 30s.
How about this? I got one question for you.
Yeah.
It seems to me on these little Evinrude outboards that since they were small, low RPM, small outboards, that the poppet valve lent itself very well to making a very small outboard with very little complexity.
Yes. Yeah, having an atmospheric valve, the predecessor to the reed, really makes a small outboard.
So that was a real positive thing. On the bigger engines, like some of these, it was a limiting factor.
Limiting for high horsepower for sure. Very kind of a restrictive kind of an intake system.
Okay.
Yeah. These things are quite popular. They miniaturize themselves to being not as far as ignitions. They miniaturized the ignition so well that they probably didn't work that well.
Well, most of them don't run that I run into.
That 1930s, of course, opened the door to these Neptune Mighty Mites.
They came out with that right before the war.
Yeah,
or 37, 38, something like that.
There.
Yeah. I mean, that's a 58. It's a lot newer, but they were basically exactly the same.
Right.
And that one right there is very high compression compared to that Elto Scout.
Yeah, I'm sure.
A lot more compression.
Right.
And they seem to start and run very well, but they're noisy.
Yeah. But they did their job.
They do the job.
Inexpensive, dependable.
Right.
Reed valve, by the way.
Yes, that's a big plus.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if the original ones were or not.
Well, some of the older ones were probably three-port. But when they came out with the single, I'm not sure. This one's a three-port.
Okay, that's a three-port right there. Yeah, that's the 30s.
Yeah, but so at some point they changed the power head into a reed.
So the reed was a big factor.
A big factor for
when we're talking about anything.
Yeah.
Yes.
And of course, the 30s opened the door to, all these low-cost small outboards. They were inexpensive. Companies actually were started during the Depression, which is hard to believe that any company could actually start.
Like Thor here.
Like Thor could start in the Depression and be successful.
36?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't for very long.
Right, but inexpensive to manufacture. The companies, I think, had an advantage because they were small companies and they were low overhead.
Okay.
Whereas the giants like Johnson, who was going out of business at the time, were so big. They were used to such high volume, and the volume disappeared, and they're stuck with these huge manufacturing facilities. So certainly Thor, and then later Mercury. Champion was another one that started in the 30s. Again, based on some.
Well, these were made by Scott Atwater, right? The machining company.
Yeah.
These Champions right here.
Right.
This one here and that one there.
Right.
That's just before the war started, 1941 model. Yeah. Okay, this is pre-war Mercury, 1940. It has the counterbalanced crankshaft in it, which that counterbalanced crank allowed a alternate firing twin to achieve really good horsepower very smoothly. That was a huge breakthrough that very unsung. That Johnson started with this little engine right here. It had a reed, but they were really heavy, crude reeds. The reeds in here are like barn doors. They barely flex, but they do work, and the engine does run. There's a reed up here, a single reed up there, and a single reed down here. They're in front. So this is pre-war, 1940. After the war, Keith Caver had a lot of experience building airplane motors and drone motors and different motors for different small applications. And after the war, he had no inventory that he had to sell. This stuff was long gone.
So
And
Kiefer got really good at miniature engines, then, is what we're saying, with the drone
high
engines.
horsepower, high
lightweight,
revving,
yeah, right.
small,
Yeah.
compact engines.
Yeah.
And so after the war, he came out with a bunch of motors like this right here. This is a 6 horsepower, fairly conventional. They have a jug on them. They put out reasonably good horsepower, but this was really a refinement of the pre-war engine. So while he's working on this, he's also working on his KE7. This engine was really different. What was really different about this engine is the reeds were internalized. The jugs were unit cast. They weren't two-piece or anything like that. And this is a 20 cubic inch. And for some reason, this engine ran really, really, really good and put out an awful lot of horsepower, which he downrated. 1947 rolls around. This engine's just been introduced, and this guy named Del Seymour took one of these engines and ran it in the New York Marathon, the only Mercury in the New York Marathon. He won his class B, beat all the old Johnsons, all the old Evinrudes. He beat most of C. I think he came in 4th or 5th in C. And he beat half the D motors. The next year, more than 50% of the engines in that race were Mercuries, just as a result of this guy winning what he did. And it made Mercury's reputation. Carl Kiefer was very unhappy, but this engine's tiny. Look at that. That's a 20 cubic inch engine down there, that big Johnson, 1929. And they really basically had the same engine at the end of World War II. They were still selling that same basic engine. And, you know, heavy, old, low RPM in comparison to this thing. Look at the size difference. This thing is tiny. And it's like, it's a hurricane. And that's what Carl Kiefer called him later on. I think this one's a lightning, but he had these names for him that were great as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, this is the lightning. And then the hurricane was the KG7, which was a refinement of this thing. He kept getting more and more horsepower and more speed out of them. So this really was the ultimate, the peak of miniaturization, these little engines right here. Okay. All right.
So this is a modern 2-cylinder, 2-stroke outboard motor. And the reason why we're looking at this is just to show the counterbalance crankshaft and how that design that Johnson pioneered in 1925 has persisted even till today. And here's a modern outboard that shows, a nice, even though this is a built-up crankshaft, it's still counterbalanced. It needs to be to function without vibration.
Run smoothly and right.
Yeah.
Right. And you've even got it on. Is this one
The 4-stroke? Yeah,
No.
kind of. I mean, it's.
Is that counterbalance?
Well, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Look at the
counterbalance.
size of that
Even the
center main.
4-stroke
Yeah.
has a huge
Oh,
counterbalance.
sure. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.